Buenas tardes a todos y todas y muchas gracias por la oportunidad. Y para mí es un gran honor de hablar sobre un tema que considero realmente muy importante para mí. Y hablo os un poco de qué hacemos en Nestlé R&D, en Suiza, en Santiago y en todo el mundo. Pero lo siento, voy a cambiar en inglés porque mi español es un poco malo, so disculpe. And before we start, I would like, of course, to start with a question about, do we actually need alternative protein? Do we need transition? And we start with a reality fact check. According to the United Nations prediction, in 2050, the world will embrace 9.5 billion of people. And that's not anymore a prediction, it's really the reality. And this number will go up above 10 million in 2100. And of course, we know that our traditional agriculture really starts to strain our lands and also strain our environment. So when we dive a bit into the comparison between the alternative protein and the regular animal protein, there are some really alarming numbers that we can see. So of course, one that most of you know is that about the carbon emission. And we all know that animal farming and livestock in general contribute a lot to the global carbon emission. Also, if we check a bit further and we compare the land and also the water use for agricultural farming compared to plant-based farming, we can see that the numbers are much higher. And with this, we can see that there is a vast expanse of land that is currently used only for feeding and grazing livestock. So it's uniquely dedicated to feeding the livestock. And when we check about number, there is a number that is also a bit more alarming, is that for the moment, 80% of the global agricultural land is occupied by the livestock. However, the livestock only represent 20% of the global calorie count. So then when we check the alternative with the plant proteins, such as soybean, that you have here on the graph, we see that the amounts are much lower. So now it's also our choice to be a bit mindful of our dietary choices. So we can live now also in a future where we decide to fill our plates, not only with protein that can nourish our body, but that are also helpful for the environment. Now I understand it's not always easy. You can tell me that there are plenty of alternative protein and how we can choose them. Actually, how also for us as scientists, how we decide to go for one or another. Because we also have here to be honest and recognize that the success story of alternative protein will not only rely solely on the environmental benefits. It's also need at the end to bring products that are satisfying for the consumer, because taste matter. And at the end of the day, it's always what matters the most for the consumer and for all of us. We need to have tasty product and satisfying product. The good news for this is that currently, whether it's academia, partner, startup, industry, and also public and governmental organizations are working really hand by hand. So with a chef of the kitchen, scientist, innovator in food to really try to craft this delicious product and delicious alternative. There is now another thing that is also very important that I would like to highlight is it's not only about taste, it's also about functionality. Because the idea with all this plant-based alternative and this alternative protein is to not compromise our alimentation or to compromise our habit. It's more to expand our culture with a new flavor, a new type of texture. So it's the idea of really not doing any compromise. So here, functionality is also key. We need not to have only tasty product, but also very functional product. And of course, this doesn't go without any challenges, because with all kind of success story, there are also a lot of challenges. So here behind me, you have a long list of alternative protein. So I guess you know probably most of them, but maybe some of them are still a bit like less known. But what is important is to highlight the two really challenges that we are facing right now. The first one is the supply chain, because as the protein demand raises, or we can still ensure that the supply chain continue to respect the environment and is sustainable. Because of course, if the idea is to replace the traditional animal protein by alternative protein, we also need to ensure that the supply will not bring much more impact on the environment. If not, I mean, you guess it makes actually no sense. So here, really from the farm to the fork, there is a need to control and regulate perfectly this supply chain. The second point here is the allergenicity and the safety issue that this kind of alternative protein can cause. And here the most important will be that we have a clear labeling, transparency labeling, regulatory check, and that we ensure that our products are safe for all consumers. So that's really these are really the key. Now, on top of this, on top of the allergenicity, the safety, and the supply chain, raise also all the technical challenge that we are facing as kind of a scientist when we are trying to work with this alternative product and mainly the plant-based product. The first one is regarding the sensory perception. So I don't know if some of you in the room already tried some plant-based alternative, but you may have recognized that they have a very distinct taste. And also the sensory sometimes is unfortunately not there. Most of the plant protein are recognized as more bitter, and they also have this really earthy and grassy note, and sometimes even a bit more rancid that we also taste sometimes with old oil. And they are way more astringent, and also they give a bit of a dry mouthfeel. And this is kind of interesting because this is simply due to the nature of the protein. This is simply due to the way they were designed by nature. Now, next is the stability and solubility. So this is actually a real product that we are facing sometimes. And here the main challenges is, again, because of the design of this protein were not designed to be inside a milk or be inside a liquid. They were simply designed to store some energy from the plant. So we had to really think about how we can work with them to also achieve a good solubility and stability despite their initial property and their initial structure. And of course, this solubility and stability problem create a lot of texture problem. And then here you can imagine on the picture you have here, when you are having this kind of product at home, of course it's a bit disappointing. Like if after like 2-3 days in the fridge you are trying to pour your cream. This is an example of a plant-based cream, and you cannot do anything because it's just stuck in the bottle. And here again, all these challenges are related to the new property that we are discovering from this plant. And last but not least is regarding the nutritional value. We know that the amino acid profile and the digestibility of the plant protein is in general much lower than the animal protein. So here we have to work kind of carefully to combine them in a smart way, and it's only this combination in a smart way in product that could lead at the end to better product with better nutritional value. Now, how we can also tackle them, because the idea is, okay, we have challenges, do we stop here? So of course not. And then one of the simple things is to dive in the sensory world. And here the idea is not just to compare them, is we really try to understand how they behave and also how they have perceived by the consumer. When we give them to a consumer, how they perceive it. And by doing this, we can really see difference between the plant protein. And it's only by having this information that we can choose the right fit depending on the product. And with this, we can ensure that the protein we choose doesn't not just look good, on the paper with the property and the sensory, but that also deliver the right taste and texture. The other thing we had to do was to almost reinvent all our process. Because of course, it turned out that the classical process we were using for animal product was not just working sometimes. And we had to really reinvent ourselves and try to think outside the box. What parameter I could change? Do I have to play with the temperature? What I need to do to really understand the behavior and at the end, master my process that I can deliver the best product with this alternative protein. And at the end, you can obtain, of course, some final product that you may recognize some of them. Now, on the next step, I would like to change a bit the topic, but still staying in the world of the alternative protein, and I would like to bring you with me on a journey like beneath the wave. Because beneath the wave, there is a hidden gem that is kind of unexploited at the moment, and we have a bit also forgotten. And this gem is like the seaweed. And with this, I also would like to quote an article from Carlos Manuel Duarte that was published like 15 years ago, and it was entitled, "Will the Ocean Help Feed the Humanity?" And there was a very interesting conclusion also about this article. It's a conclusion that I would like to share with you, is that we have to be aware that relying solely on either marine-based or land-based product will anyway not help to feed the humanity. We need to find a way to have a smart integration of both marine and land-based to ensure that we can achieve this objective. And what is interesting with the seaweed is there was archaeological evidence that the seaweed were kind of consumed a really long time ago. Like there is evidence in Chile that it was consumed more than 14,000 years ago. So why now it has disappeared? Why we are not so familiar with it? In Asia, it's still very common, but it's true that in Chile or in Europe, we actually know them, but we don't really consume them. And why the seaweed are a hidden gem? Because they actually also contain all the nutrients that we would like to have in a well-balanced diet. They are rich in mineral, they are rich in vitamin, and also after drying, the content of fiber can go up to 55%. And the protein content, depending on the species, can oscillate between 20 to 30%. Moreover, if we think about the seaweed as a culture, the seaweed will never compete with the land because they are in the sea or the ocean. Then secondly, they will of course not require extra addition of water. And moreover, they are like a very important organism in a system, in an ecosystem that is very well balanced. And we can think about farming the seaweed in a way that is both benefit for human consumption and also for the ocean. By simply, thanks to the high yield of seaweed, changing species during the farming in a kind of a cycle way during a year by having 2-3 species that can alternate and rotate and always have like a nice production without having any impact on the environment. Now when we also check at the global current seaweed production, the results are kind of interesting and the numbers are a bit scary or a bit surprising. Is for the moment we have more than 97% of the total seaweed production that is coming from Asia. So the market of the global seaweed production is literally dominated by Asia. And in that case, 95% of the total production of seaweed is coming from aquaculture and farming. The current usage of seaweed is mainly used, of course, as food. So in Asia, it's very common to use it as a whole ingredient, or for a big part of the seaweed, it's simply used to extract polysaccharide that we also know as carrageenan, alginate, agar-agar, that are simply additive that you can also find again in some food product, cosmetic, but also pharmaceutical product now. And there is a very interesting part, is the specific case of Chile in the world of seaweed. Because despite, you see here on the graph, the number might be very low, because Chile only represents 1% of the total global production of seaweed. You can still see that this 1% plus Chile as the 6th exporter and producer of seaweed in the world. And actually, it's the first country outside Asia that are having this kind of position. It's much higher than the whole Europe and also much higher than the whole North America. And we can explain this kind of easily. It's somehow, in Chile, you have more than 6,000 kilometers of coastline. And here, of course, I also didn't count everything in the fjord, like when we go in the south, that will, of course, increase a lot more the length of the coast. But then, surprisingly, in Chile, 95% is coming from wild harvesting. So as you have seen before, in Asia, or in the world, 95% of the global production was led by aquaculture, but in Chile, we have completely the opposite. We have 95% only coming from wild harvesting. So of course, you can imagine that this can create a big pressure on the ecosystem. And of course, there will be a need, for regulation about this wild harvesting. And here I believe that the key is to be able to switch from a sustainable wild harvesting to also a sustainable farming, where actually seaweed are farmed in a sustainable way. And if we think about it, there is after the last step. Because when we collect seaweed, what do we do then with the seaweed? Most of the seaweed now, also in Chile, are just taken, and they are just exported as such. Because seaweed is still recognized as a product with a very low value that brings almost no benefit. It's kind of a cheap product. So of course, if you are a farmer, why you want to farm seaweed if it cannot bring you any money in return? So there is really a need to improve our drying and processing technique to really revalorize the seaweed. And with this, the idea is to go way beyond the additive. We should stop extracting simply one element out of the seaweed. We should use the seaweed as such, as a whole ingredient, as a whole element for food consumption. And on this, I would like to highlight two initiatives that are kind of showing this kind of collaboration. Because if we want to promote farming, there is a need that we sit all around the table between farmer, university, academia, industry, startup, and that everyone together find a way to be able to drive some change into a sustainable farming. And on this, we are now part in the partnership with the Católica, where we are trying to explore really the potential of seaweed as food consumption and as of a food additive. Then the second one is there are some innovative missions that we are also part, and one recently was last November, organized by the Netherlands. And the idea of this mission was to really explore the seaweed situation in Chile and to discuss all together with different partners to really try to drive some change for the future. Now to conclude, I would just like to say that the world of alternative protein is not just about an opportunity. It's really a collective change. It's something where each of us can really make like a small impact. You have seen it's just a question of maybe eating 1 or 2 times per week less meat, and you can already bring a lot of change. And the idea is only together that all this small change will create like a substantial impact. And I believe that in this journey, it's really like the key are really unity, discussion, exchange, and of course commitment. And I think it's only like this that we can work for a better future. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you.